Hello, welcome to another live Google Hangout on the Living Income Guaranteed. And today we are continuing a bit our discussion on Basic Income Canada, and specifically more diving into the story of Basic Income, previous pilot programs, and all the rest of principles and objectives that it has had throughout time. And more so, of course, specifically focusing on Basic Income Canada network and one of its participants and advocate, who is Tim Ellis from Toronto in Ontario. So hi, Tim. Welcome to the Hangout, and thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So as everyone knows, we specify our topic specifically so that you, the viewer, can participate with placing comments, questions throughout the Hangout. Tim has specifically requested that he wants to see these questions, so please let them come. And to remind you, you can also participate with these questions and comments by clicking on the Be Part of the Conversation icon on YouTube, or going directly to the Google event link, where you will have to be logged in with a Google Plus account in order to place questions and comments. We will make our best to get to all of them, so please participate and let yourself be read. So, Tim, to begin with, we have quite an interesting perspective of basic income that we haven't actually gotten that in depth into in these Hangouts, which is the story so far of basic income. But before we go into that, let's first hear about your own story and how you became part of the basic income movement in Canada.
Sure, okay. I am originally from the United States. I moved up to Canada about 3.5 years ago, and I had been politically active back in America, particularly with the Obamacare push, some of the politics around that. So when I got to Canada, I was looking to get involved here, and I have always been interested in economics. I used to work in finance, and while I was looking around up here, I stumbled across an article by Senator Hugh Segal, who is a conservative senator here in Canada. You may have spoken about him in the past. He's a very well-known advocate for basic income and negative income tax. So I spoke with his office and asked, I was like, oh, this makes a lot of sense. I'd like to know more about this. And he pointed me in the direction of Rob Rayner and the Basic Income Canada Network. I got in touch with them and quickly became a volunteer. I've been with them ever since.
So in terms of Canada and basic income, we know that there has been actually the Mincome project or a basic income pilot project in Manitoba, Canada. So why don't we dive directly into that so that, I mean, we mentioned it in the last Hangout with John Sanderson, but today I'd like to hear also your perspective and what you have to say about it, because it's something that Canada should reconsider implementing again. What would you say?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that the great tragedy of the Manitoba experiment with Mincome was that it was never really fully completed. It was instituted in 1974, and they were very meticulous about collecting the data. The intent was to study the impact of a basic income. The particular focus they were looking at was the impact on the labor market. They weren't as interested in the social elements, but there's data on that as well. Unfortunately, with the change in government, they did shut the program down, and the data was never really fully analyzed until many, many years later. Dr. Evelyn Forget wound up looking at the data now. So now we do have a report, an analysis of that data. We're able to get some of the information out of it.
So I've heard that most of this data has been shelved, meaning it hasn't been made public. So have you gotten any data out of it, or any facts that you see worthwhile sharing here in this Hangout as a purpose to why these kind of programs are actually beneficial for society?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the big concerns people have when you talk about the basic income, they'll often say, okay, well, that does make a lot of sense, but won't people stop working? And that's a natural response that basically builds on our current understanding of how markets should work and how wages should work. We should be looking at maybe reassessing how we think about that. But even until we do that, the evidence from the Mincome experiment and from other basic income pilots does demonstrate there's actually not a lot of work disincentive. Of course, it depends on how it's structured, but the Mincome experiment was structured in a way that gave people at the time a top up. So they would work and do whatever it was they were going to do, and they'd get the difference paid to them to bring them up to what would be in today's dollars about $16,000 for a single person. the money that they used, or the money they were given, was used for the same things you'd expect that money to be used for: paying bills, putting food on the table. The effect on labor markets, which is what, again, they were primarily studying, showed that primary income earners didn't change their labor habits at all. There was actually no disincentive whatsoever. If you looked at secondary and tertiary income earners, so children or spouses that stayed at home, you did find changes in the labor patterns, but primarily what you saw was that adolescents would stay in school longer, they would stop dropping out to go help support the family, and then new mothers tended to stay home longer. And this, again, was in the time before Canada had paid paternity leave and maternity leave. So those are both very positive social impacts and fairly negligible labor market impacts. Those are people that probably shouldn't be entering the labor market anyway, or should have the opportunity to avoid doing so if they choose.
So in terms of Basic Income Canada network and these kind of examples, what would you say is required for more people to kind of get back to, investigating this case of the income experiment in Manitoba? What would you say is required for more people to kind of realize that it was beneficial and that it should go back into being applied somewhere, maybe one city in Canada? Are there any discussions at the moment in kind of making people aware that this happened already? Why don't we make it happen again?
Yeah, absolutely. And basic income is really kind of having a moment right now. It's definitely on the radar in a way that it hasn't been in a very long time, since the 70s, really. There's almost constant press. It seems like every week there's new developments. Recently, the Alberta election got a lot of news, but the day before the Alberta election, there was also an election in Prince Edward Island, which is another province, much smaller province here in Canada. And prior to that election, there was a debate in which all four party leaders accepted that a basic income was the way forward for Prince Edward Island. It's a big step. That's a lot of momentum there. So our job now is to make people to build on that, to make people aware of what a basic income is, how it could work, and the evidence behind it. That's certainly the primary focus for Basic Income Canada Network right now, is raising that awareness. Um, Certainly, once we've reached a certain point, we do want to start to transfer to a policy perspective and start costing out plans, start developing plans that could be actually implemented. Because the goal, of course, is to get this implemented across Canada. This is the way forward for capitalism at this point. The trends are very, very clear in Canada and around the world with automation and the way that the economy is structured, that the old system of providing support through wages simply isn't delivering the appropriate support for civilization as a whole. So as we go through our next few years here, we're certainly looking at building that awareness across the nation, getting the data out there. As far as implementing another pilot, I'd almost say the time for that is past. I think the evidence is quite clear and very compelling. We could certainly, if we wanted to develop, perhaps try out different variables and try different versions of basic income, perhaps that would be appropriate. But I think just trying to determine whether or not it's the way forward, I think we're past that point. Certainly, there's more evidence from other programs around the world. And even within Canada already, we do have income security programs. They're simply limited to certain demographics. You get like the old age income support and the Canada Pension Plan. Those are examples of income security programs in Canada. So we've accepted this is important, and we've accepted that it works. So the time, I think, for pilots is probably past.
And there's also, of course, the importance of this to be acknowledged not only at a Canadian level but global level. I mean, if we look at the trends, no country is really doing that well to say that, well, we really don't need such kind of support to be given, and our job here is also to promote it as an immediate solution as well. And what about in relation to, well, before we jump onto other topics, I'd like to hear more of your perspectives on previous pilot programs. You said that there is sufficient evidence, so why don't you share more on that evidence of why you see it works?
Sure, absolutely. Basic income is a state-generated cash transfer program. There are also private cash transfer programs. Give Directly is a very powerful charity working right now, and they're very transparent, which I think is important. And the data is very clear there that they're getting a lot of great results. The UNICEF is also applying a basic income pilot program in certain different areas. There's some in India being used right now. And because we're a lot more aware of how income impacts things like health outcomes and social outcomes, there's more study that has been directed to those elements as well now, not just the labor market force participation and the economic participation. So we have data on that. So we can see that, for example, the UNICEF program in India, they saw that not only was there reduced anxiety, there was reduced incidence of malnourishment, which makes sense, reduced incidence of illness, hospital visits go down, um, but they also see an increase in work. So people are working more because they have more opportunity to do that. And noticeably, the switch in work tends to be from wage labor over to entrepreneurial activity. You're seeing people take their destiny into their own hands, start their own small businesses, participate with the economy in a less coercive way, in a way which they're not depending on someone else for their wages. They're setting their own path and they're determining their own outcomes. It's very powerful. That's the promise of capitalism done right. It gives people that opportunity to pursue their opportunities that they choose and to find their own path. So basic income provides that support necessary to do that. There's also pilot programs that have occurred in Namibia. Um, Before the pilot program was instituted, 42% of the children in that village were malnourished. By 2010, that had dropped to 10%. That's a huge, huge quality of life gain from basic income. They're also seeing higher school attendance rates. People aren't struggling. They have the time and the energy to go to school, complete their education. Um, One thing I think that's overlooked frequently is that you're also going to see better crime outcomes, crime statistics. People are not desperate and they don't have to turn to crime. And in fact, the evidence again bears that out. If you look at the Namibia study, there was a 36.5% drop in crime since these cash grants were introduced. And then poverty rates dropped, of course. And again, income increased across the board above and beyond the amount of the grants. So there's actually more economic activity occurring as these grants are in place.
There was one article some months ago, last year, about central banks giving cash to people. What's your perspective on that? And this was a Council on Foreign Relations article.
Mhm.
So what would you say on this?
On central banks giving out the cash?
Yes.
Okay. I didn't read that article. Are you talking in a basic income perspective?
Yeah, it would be like similar to a basic income, more like cash transfers or handouts in such way, which is interesting because it also indicates that even in the top tiers of our economic system, they're also considering this as a solution. So I'd like to know your perspective if you want.
Sure, sure. It makes sense from their perspective as well. I think that's one thing that we really need to highlight. That's incumbent on us as an advocacy group to really bring attention to the fact that this benefits people at the top as much as the people at the bottom. And any bank that's making a thorough study is going to come to the same conclusion. And of course, that's their job, right? They're going to study these things. Um, what you find, and what we are finding, the recession that occurred in 2008, we haven't really fully recovered from that. We're officially out of a recession, but that hasn't really been the case in people's everyday experiences. And the cause of that is that there simply is a lack of economic activity stemming from a lack of consumer demand. People don't have the money to make the purchases they used to. A lot of those purchases prior to the crash were driven by credit. That's where the subprime mortgage lending came into the problem. People were using their houses as credit cards because they didn't have the money to survive the way they could. Um, a basic income is the direct answer to that. It instills a floor of consumer demand below which the economy can't drop. So this is something that benefits the investment class as well, because they can make investments in businesses that can reliably count on people having the money to participate in that economy, participate in the economic activity that is generated there. And absolutely makes sense from a central banking perspective as well.
So in terms of the economic trend lines and the current state of affairs, why do you see that it is almost like an inevitable step for most countries if we want to not only save the economy but make it work in a appropriate manner?
Yeah, it's a redefining of the way the economy works now. Right now, we tie your individual livelihood in most cases, unless you're independently wealthy. So that's the only way to redistribute wealth back down. And the economy is not about concentrating wealth. It's about distributing wealth throughout it and using that wealth to achieve things. Um, the problem is that right now, a lot of the incentives in capitalism are to innovate, to find better efficiencies, and that's a great thing. That does make prices lower. That does make things more successful. Does make things more advanced. That's where our progress comes from. However, there are costs associated with that. If you get a job or a company, a big company, and they find an efficiency, then that's good for the company. But sometimes those efficiencies mean there's fewer jobs to do, and that means people who depend on those jobs are now out of work. So it's artificially putting people at odds with each other just through the nature of the incentives. And that process is accelerating. Automation is really coming along. We're reaching a point where universal automation or automation that is not industry specific is not far off. You're looking at manufacturing jobs have been in decline for quite a while, not because manufacturing output is less in demand. We manufacture more than ever before, but we're simply able to do it better and faster and cheaper with automation. That is now expanding into what were previously considered more professional jobs or more creative jobs. There are machines and programming that can write, that can do legal research. These jobs are not immune, and that's only going to continue. If we continue to rely on wages as the only way to redistribute wealth through the economy and to circulate that wealth through the economy in that direction, then we're going to run into exactly what we've been experiencing, which is a lack of aggregate demand as people lack capital and continued human costs of poverty and struggling with poverty.
So it is a vicious cycle that we won't get out of if we don't give each other that power of acquisition. So that seems to be like a no-brainer, but why aren't more people seeing that the solution is to give that power of acquisition money to everyone as a way to revive the economy? Why do you see this is not like a readily seen thing?
Well, there's a couple things. Partly, I think it's just a lack of awareness. Certainly, this, although it is becoming quite popular these days, people are becoming aware of it. There's still, I would say, the majority of the population still probably isn't aware of exactly what a basic income is. We do find that people, when we explain it, they're excited. They say, "Oh, that actually does make a lot of sense," but they often hadn't heard of it before. As we get through that, that's one that's easily addressed. Perhaps less easily addressed is there is a certain amount of stigma to the idea of free money or welfare. There has been a bit of a demonization of people who require those things. There's certainly a stigma attached to it, which is unfortunate and unfair because there's, and this is why I think it's so important to communicate that this has value to people across the board. It's very obvious that it has value to people in poverty, but it's sometimes less obvious that it has such value to people in the investment class or people who are in the average working class now. So we have to make that case. But getting through that stigma is going to be difficult. It's something that people regularly struggle with. But I think it's achievable. There's certainly cases in the past where we've struggled through similar instances of stigma and overcome it. It's a matter of communication. It's a matter of understanding and laying out the facts. The evidence is very, very clear. So basic income exists in a sort of a unique place in that it is both ethical and economically sensible, which is a very good place to be.
In terms of you and your organization's activity, I assume that it involves a lot of communication and kind of showing to people, maybe individually or in small groups, what basic income is about. So I'd like to hear more on that experience firsthand and the most usual obstacles or problems, maybe even like a language problem that could come up when trying to explain people this. Is it readily understandable, or are there more of a psychological obstacles to understand it?
One thing that's really exciting about this movement is that every time we engage with different groups, every time we engage with different individuals, the response is almost uniformly excited. It's almost uniformly a sense of understanding. It's very, very rare that you get strong pushback. There are often questions, and typically the first question is, well, won't people just not work? And the great thing, again, is that we have the facts there. We have the evidence there that even if that were the case, I think it would still be worth doing, but it's not. The labor market participation does not drop. And in fact, there's more work done when the basic income is in place because there's more opportunity. So with those facts behind us, it's pretty easy to communicate that to people, and we found a very positive response across the board. It's very exciting. I very clearly remembered working to campaign for Obamacare, and it was very, very stiff, fierce resistance there. Not all of it very well reasoned, but there was some, there was a lot of arguments to be had, and it was a slog. It was a fight. This feels different. This is something that is is timely. People are aware of the state of the economy. They're feeling it firsthand. They see that it's different than it used to be. They understand that the generation that we're in has fewer opportunities than the generation came before us, and that's a new thing. No one remembers anything like that before. So they understand that something needs to change. There is a cost to the status quo, and people are recognizing that. And that's the big thing that needs to happen. People need to understand, and do seem to understand, that simply staying the same is not going to be sufficient, is not going to cut it. And so they're looking for alternatives, and we have one, and we have one that we know works.
In terms of capitalism, I read that you also agree that basic income would perfect capitalism. So what would you say to people that usually fear that this will simply wreak havoc to people's businesses, and that maybe they will end up without people working, or that they would have to give higher wages? I mean, what would you say to them as a way to let them know that this is in no way something that will undermine what they already have?
Yeah, that's a good question, and that's one that we do have to communicate. Again, it comes back to the data here. Certainly, people are right to be concerned, and people who have a lot of a stake in the current economy would be the most concerned about any changes to it. But again, it's clear, even above and beyond the sense of human compassion and taking care of each other, is very important and is a big part of the Canadian ethos. It makes economic sense as well, and you can see clearly that excuse me, I have a message there, sorry. You can see clearly that when you look at the implementation of basic income or any kind of income transfer program, like the Give Directly charities, you can see that there is a stimulated economy behind it. The notion of a stimulus to the economy is economic doctrine that makes sense, and the Canadian government embraces this and understands this. When you looked at the crash in 2008, the Harper government, which is a conservative government, took it upon themselves to run a deficit, implement some stimulus, and get the economy going, because they know that delivering money to people in the consumer class does stimulate the economy. This is basic economy 101. So expanding that out in a way that ensures income security does make sense economically, but you also have to look at it as an investment, and we communicate it that way. This is an investment in the future, this is an investment in our own people, and this is an investment in our economy. You're looking at better healthcare outcomes, which means reductions in expenditure in the healthcare system, which currently we have universal healthcare in Canada, and that healthcare is one of the fundamental elements of it that is regarded as essential, and actually the law is that it must be universally accessible. So we offer that to everyone across Canada, regardless of income, regardless of any other factors. It's unconditional. But that income or that healthcare is acute healthcare. So it only deals with issues when they've reached the point that they need urgent care. But that's not the most efficient way to deal with healthcare. And it's not the way that we should be dealing with healthcare. If you look at income security as a plank of healthcare delivery, as part of the healthcare delivery, then you get to understand that you're making a very positive investment in those healthcare outcomes. You're giving people the opportunity to take care of themselves in a way that saves us money in the long run by not requiring so much urgent healthcare. So that's a very compelling point. Again, you get back to the crime statistics. You're looking at people who are less in need of turning poverty or turning to crime, and people who are able to escape situations where they would be forced into criminal activity. So you're seeing more positive outcomes across the board there, and again, reduced costs. So this is an investment that actually in the long run saves us money, and at the same time improves outcomes for people. You have to ask yourself, what is the current cost? What's the cost we're spending now? How much are we paying now to get the system that we have? Canada Without Poverty once estimated recently that it was costing us about $80 billion a year in poverty amelioration expenses, in healthcare expenses, to maintain the current level of poverty that we have. So eliminating these issues and giving this income security is an investment that will pay itself off in the long run very readily.
Yes, many people always bring up the point of, oh, well, it will be like an extra expense from the government and we will get more taxes. I guess that you get this question quite frequently. So how would you usually share with the person the response to that?
Sure. Okay. And you have to look at the structure, the devils in the details, of course. But there's a couple ways to go about implementing a basic income. And if you look at one like the one that's been called for by the mayors in Edmonton and Calgary recently in Alberta, they're looking at a negative income tax, which is one method that allows you to structure the tax code in a progressive way and set a floor beyond which people cannot fall. So you've got one option there to look at a little more progressive code. You also have to look again at the increased economic activity. There's certainly going to be greater revenue coming from these things, from the economic activity that's stimulated, from the entrepreneurial activity that's stimulated, and again, your cost savings over the long run. So people may say, okay, we're going to have to increase taxes here. Is that true? Maybe. Depends on how you structure it. Are you going to increase taxes on the average person? Probably not. Taxes in Canada are quite low on in corporate taxes. There may be room to move there. Hard to say. But again, over the long run, this isn't an expense that has no return. This is an investment with a return on it. So look at the big picture there.
Yeah, that's a great point to also emphasize whenever we can, that it's not a one-time investment and that it goes down the drain, but it's actually a way to make the cycle of the economy be fruitful in all ways. So why would you say that basic income increases liberty and this kind of general ability to choose how you want to live and how you want to work, if you want to work?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question, and I think that's an important point worth discussing. Kind of get at the overarching reasoning behind it. Right now, when you engage with the labor market, you don't have a lot of power as a wage earner, and in fact, you're getting less and less power every year. So you're negotiating from a position of weakness, and this, of course, is the premise behind unions, which is that collective bargaining gives employees a greater voice and a more equal voice with their employers. But we're in a situation where if you don't have a job, you're very actively suffering. You simply don't have the means to maintain your livelihood. You really can't better yourself or better your own position. So you're caught in a place where if you don't have a job, or if you have a job that doesn't pay very well and doesn't get a lot of benefit to you, then it's not only is it difficult to survive, but it's difficult to change that situation. So you're stuck. And this gives a lot of the power to employers. Now, it's not that employers are bad. It's not that the people who own the businesses are bad people. Not by any means. They're just as good as the rest of us, and they're just doing their best too. It's simply that given the situation, they're looking at the numbers and they're trying to maximize their outcome, which makes sense. But there are human costs involved with the way it's structured now. With the basic income, you have a lot more liberty to approach the job market as an equal. This is consensual capitalism. You have a chance now to approach the job market and a position of maximizing your own interests without the paternalism of welfare and without the overwhelming employer power that you might deal with now. You have the ability to say, well, okay, I am not going to take this job right now. It's not a good fit for me, and it would leave me with no time to better myself. I can go to school, or I can look for a career in a field I'm more interested in. I can work on finding a different job and take the time to do that. So it's an increase in individual liberty as well, and I think that's an important point. It's a very coercive labor market right now, and the basic income alleviates a lot of that.
Exactly. So it's time to move on to the questions. So let's get to the first one that arrived even before the Hangout started from Rafi6700. I have come to the clear conclusion that money is a tool of division and a symptom of human fear. Comfort in the monetary system is obviously not the solution. My understanding of universal basic income is just that. How is it a solution?
Okay, so I guess the question is about is implying that money has an inherent divisiveness to it, and does universal basic income alleviate that or ameliorate that? I would say money can certainly have that appearance, but money isn't a thing in its own. Currency is just a representation of something that is real. It's a representation of human desire. It's a representation of scarcity, and it's a representation of individual and relative utility. So if you were to do away with money entirely, you'd simply look at replacing it with a different system. And there may be more fair systems, probably not as efficient, but there may be more fair systems, but they're simply going to reflect those same things because those are endemic to the human condition, not unique to money itself. So essentially, we're stuck with it. We're going to have either money, currency, or some other system. And in either case, you're going to have similar problems. So, given the system that we have, which is currency, and the monetary system we have now, basic income works within that. Sure, it doesn't completely overturn it, and I don't think it necessarily should. But it does make it a lot more fair. It does alleviate a lot of the problems that are inherent to the system currently. And it does reshape the way that it's structured. It does give a lot more power to individual people, and it does redefine the way that wealth is distributed in a way that sets a very positive tone for the future. There can be further changes going forward, but this is a change we need right now, and it's a step in the right direction.
I agree that money in all ways is a human creation. Therefore, we have to sort out the kind of agreement that we make it to be instead of seeing money as a problem in itself. So let's move on to the next one. Thanks, Rafi, for your question. This is from Joanna Jesus, and she's saying, "Hi, team. Do you have any Canadian public figure or political leader endorsing the basic income? If so, do you recommend this strategy to other basic income groups worldwide? Thanks."
Well, I think you cut out a bit there, but I think I caught the question. It was, do we have any public figures who endorse the basic income, and do I recommend pursuing that strategy around the world?
Yes.
And the answer is yes in both cases. We have a number of public figures who've endorsed basic income here across the political spectrum. Of course, I told you earlier about Senator Segal, who first turned me onto it. He's been an outspoken activist for it for a long time and still is. We've heard from, there's other conservatives who've spoken in favor of it. There's also the Liberal Party here in Canada endorsed a basic income pilot in its platform earlier this year, or last year, I'm sorry. There's Roderick Benz actually has been doing a lot of work on getting a basic income information out to the public. He's on our team as well. So you're definitely seeing prominent public figures working on this. Calgary Mayor Naheed Nenshi came out in favor of basic income recently. That was a big step. He's a well-known mayor, a beloved mayor, a very good mayor. So yes, absolutely, and that certainly is part of the strategy for activists around the world in other countries. The best way to get involved with that and to see if people can endorse these ideas is simply to ask them. Get in touch with them, talk to their offices, and see what they're into. Be ready for a presentation, put it together, and be ready to talk to them. People are looking for solutions, and people are looking to make the world a better place. I'm quite optimistic about the way people approach it, and they're open to ideas. So it's absolutely take a look and see around who's interested in these things, and pay attention to the news and what they're saying economically, and put it in front of them and see what they say.
Great. I agree with that political activism aspect of going and approaching the politicians already in office. So thanks, Joanna, for your question. We got one from Andrea Teal, and she's saying, "Hi, team. Where does Stephen Harper stand with all this?" And he is considered in the world as not a very compassionate or hard-nosed conservative, and going along with policies that are into an elitism such as the new Patriot Act that is being put forth.
Okay, that's a good question too. So the current Canadian government has been in place for several years. Stephen Harper is the Prime Minister right now. The Conservative Party we have right now is actually a merger of two parties. So there was the Progressive Conservatives and the Reform Party. The Reform Party was a little bit further to the right socially and economically, and Stephen Harper is part of that party. So where he stands on basic income, I don't know. It's tough to say. I don't know if he'll be prime minister much longer either. There's an election in October, and he's not polling very well right now. Certainly, there's two other main parties in Canada, the Liberals and the NDP. The NDP is leading right now, and they are a progressive party by quite a bit. Probably would be a bit more open to it. Certainly, the NDP just won in Alberta, and that's why when Erin and she was talking about basic income, one of the ministers now in the new government in Alberta has in the past spoken about a basic income as a positive policy option. So where Harper stands, I don't know specifically. I do think that the Conservative government here, although yes, under Harper has been perhaps implementing some problematic policies, I certainly do have issues with some of the policies steps they've taken, particularly C-51 and their muzzling of climate science. But I do think that the Conservative Party in general is open to understanding economic policy and open to discussing things in a rational way. It's quite different from back in America. There was not a lot of rational discussion, I found, in some of our debates with the Republicans. But in here, it does seem like they're open to policy options that make sense and are willing to hear the evidence. So I'm optimistic that certainly some of them would be on board. Um, so we'll see where it goes. I think after election time in October, we will be looking at our strategy for communications and interacting with the government and seeing, revising it based on who wins. Certainly, that does play a factor. But I'm optimistic about the Conservatives as well.
Great, thanks. And thanks, Andrea, for your question. We have another one from Gabriela Seves, and he's asking, hi, team, what do you see that has been the biggest challenge that the Basic Income Guarantee Program has faced when it comes to explaining and convincing the people that this is the solution that should be pushed ahead?
Okay, good question. Yeah, and the big challenge typically is the first thing people say is that, well, won't people just not work? And so above and beyond talking about the evidence with the labor market, I think it's an opportunity to engage with people on the nature of what work really means. Because when you say work and people say, won't people just not work? What they mean is a very particular kind of work. They're talking about work that has value and generates profit on the market and that you can be employed for. And that's not all the work that humans do. There's a lot of work that people do that has very little market value or certainly very little profit value. There's a lot of art that gets generated that isn't sold. There's a lot of raising children. That's a lot of work, but you don't really get paid for it typically. So there's a lot of work that people engage in that isn't work in that context, in that definition. So that's an opportunity there to talk to people about, what does work really mean to you? Because is all of the work that the market generates, is all the work that the market pays for, necessary or important, and is it even positive? We're at a point where a lot of the menial work can be done by machines, and certainly in the future will be done by machines. And if you were looking at it from an optimistic perspective, that would be a good thing. Oh, well, there's no work for humans to do. That should be a good thing. We have structured now, that would be a catastrophe. People wouldn't be able to eat. So we really have to look at why that is. That is a conscious choice we as a society have made to create a system where people cannot eat unless they provide work at a profit to the market. And is that necessarily the way forward? I don't think so. And I think it's becoming very clear to people that it's not sustainable that way. And we have to look at the way we've structured it and change things around. So that's above and beyond the data on labor market participation. The answer is, well, no, people won't just not work, but shouldn't they be able to? And then you can explain a little bit about how work is structured right now and why that's problematic for the future.
Yeah, questioning work in itself and also extending the responsibility of, well, we created this system as is, which is something that we also very much emphasize whenever we talk about these kind of solutions. It's not meant to be only implemented in government, but it is also a change of mind between all of us as a society. So I fully agree on that, Tim. Thanks for that. We have another one from Alex Russell, and he's saying, hi, Tim. If capitalism is by definition an economic system and a mode of production in which trade, industries, and the means of production are largely or entirely privately owned, would you say that this is a system that we need to try to perfect?
Well, I mean, we should always be looking to improve systems that we work with. Do I think that everything should be privately owned? I don't know. I certainly see situations where a publicly held industry maybe deliver better outcomes. My priority is always outcomes for humans. I'm not particularly ideological anymore. I was in my fiery youth maybe, but these days really what matters to me is that people are getting the best outcome they can in an ethical way. The market in private hands is a very efficient means of delivering things. Price signals are very valuable. They deliver a lot of information about relative utility and about scarcity in a way that is very efficient and very accurate. But it's not perfectly accurate. And there are situations where efficiency is not the primary goal. And there are situations where healthcare, I think, is a great example of this. If you look at the healthcare system in Canada and most of the developed countries, you'll see that it's universally provided by the government and it's often owned by the government, which is a public ownership. And the reason for that is that healthcare as a market is not very transparent. And it's pretty coercive situation where you're looking for price comparisons while you're suffering. You're not in a state where it's particularly easy for you to engage with the market in a fair way, in an ethical way. So that becomes fairly coercive. So in situations like that, certainly you should be looking at public ownership or some system of delivering better outcomes for people. So to answer the question, I'd say, yeah, I think that we should be looking to improve the system. We should be looking at evidence-based outcomes and finding ways that we can generate improvements. But the priority for us should be setting, it's a question of priorities, figuring out what is our priority. It doesn't matter to me if something is publicly held or privately held, as long as it's delivering outcomes that benefit people in an ethical way, don't hurt the environment. So we look at our system of our values as a society and our priorities as a society, and then we structure our systems to implement based on that.
I agree. And also changing the current mode of capitalism as crony capitalism to the actual capitalism, the one that was always intended to be, which is where people actually have that freedom of choice within it. Thanks, Alex, for your question. We have one comment question from Gabriel Aceves, and he's saying, with regards to the belief that taxes will raise, maybe the problem is that the basic income guarantee program is being thought from how the system currently works, meaning that people think that basic income is only about giving money to people when it is about changing the whole system. What's your perspective?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think you're right that it certainly is a change in the way the system works. It's a very fundamental change in the way that people will be interacting with each other economically. So it is a big change there, and you're right. It's a change in perspective that people they need to understand that, and we need to be able to better communicate that. So yeah, I agree that's the case. I think also a lot of times people associate a basic income with welfare, the current welfare system, which is not unfair. I can see why they would do that, but certainly that's something we need to communicate as well. The welfare system that we have now, at least in Canada, it's broken. The aim is good, but the delivery is not perfect, and there's certainly some issues with the way that we incentivize work and that we incentivize welfare. It's very paternalistic. It tells people what they can and cannot do in a way that really restricts their choices. That's quite coercive. And we do it in a way that it's very much a band-aid. It's ameliorative, and it doesn't really actually solve the problem. And partly because of that, and because we've lived with poverty for so long, people think of it as a problem that is something that we simply always have to be bandaging, that we constantly have to be taking care of. And that's not it. And really approaching this as a cure, as an actual eradication of poverty, at the same time as we look at it as an expansion of economic rights, an expansion of economic access for people. That's quite a different approach, quite a different look for people. So we need to do that to people. You're right.
I agree on the latter, and also to remind everyone that this is something that is still a concept that we have to collectively explain. And Tim, you've also been providing us with lots of facts today that we can all, as advocates of a basic income, can use to continue promoting it, because that's the kind of promotion that will enable us to get it through even the toughest mindsets, as we can call them. So thanks for that. We also have another comment from Andrea Thiel, and she's saying, thanks, team, for your work. I see that Canada could be the leading country in this understanding, since Canadians are more involved politically in what works for the entire society.
I thank you, and I appreciate that, and I'm optimistic as well. I think that we do view it as an opportunity to take a leadership role on this. Canada, for a long time, had a reputation as a leader internationally and a fairly compassionate country, which I think is warranted. I think Canadians are by and large good-hearted people, and they do care, and they're also a very reasonable people, and we care about what works. I'm very heartened by the strength with which the healthcare community has looked at this and embraced this. Certainly, you're seeing now public health associations actively calling for a basic income. They're recognizing that this is a huge determinant of health outcomes, and they're seeing that this is a very positive step forward for the society. So I think you're right. I think that we have an opportunity here, and we feel that we have an opportunity here to really take a leadership role in this and set the tone. Canada was the first country in North America to institute a public healthcare system as well. I think that so we do have a bit of a tradition of leadership on these things, and we certainly we would do that as a very positive opportunity, and we'd love to this works and this matters, and this actually helps people. That would be something we take seriously and we'd really be proud of.
It is perfectly aligned with Canadian values as well, and they should be worldwide and human values for that matter. So thanks a lot, Tim, for your delivery today. And also, I'd like to ask you as a final note where people can join in the Basic Income Canada network. I've had people asking if there is a group or any association on the west side of the country, sorry. So if you have any information for that, now is the time to share it, please.
Sure, great. I'm glad. Thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, if you look at the Basic Income Canada Network website, you can just Google Basic Income Canada Network or type in BN Canada, BIEN Canada. Then you will .com. Then you'll see that there an option to fill out a form, and it is in touch with us. And Basic Income Canada Network, we tend to look at it from a national perspective, and we don't really manage individual groups, but we do try and provide resources to those individual groups. So there's a lot of very active local groups, and we can certainly put you in touch with those. There's a list on our website of the ones that are active right now, and if you want to start one, let us know. We'll certainly add that to the site. We do have a new site coming soon, which will have a lot more resources. We're putting together that people can use to spread the message, spread the word, and get the facts. So yeah, we can do that, and then of course feel free to contact me. I'm happy to share information with anyone personally as well. So I'm always happy to talk about it. It's my passion. I'm certainly dedicated to getting this done.
Yeah, thanks a lot for actually delivering this with such precision and passion in the end. This is for the betterment of not only Canadians. We have to emphasize that you're just an example, but this is a worldwide movement that is gaining momentum. And as you've said, basic income is an idea whose time has come. So we will leave links to Tim's direct contact as well in the description box of this video. So if you also want to ask something else to Tim and you weren't able to watch the live transmission, please leave a comment on the YouTube section and we will make it known to him. So thanks, Tim, once again for your time and for being here.
Thanks very much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
And thanks to you, the viewer. We will see you again next week for another live Google Hangout. See you next time.